Around 1982, British music reshaped the American charts once again. Often labelled as new wave in the United States, this moment was driven by synthpop, amplified by MTV, and shaped by a new visual identity. This video looks at how the second British invasion unfolded and why it changed American music for good. When the phrase second British invasion is used, it is usually described in the United States as a new wave phenomenon. At the time, that label covered a wide range of artists who sounded modern, rejected classic rock traditions, and embraced new ideas about technology, image, and presentation. But if you listen closely to what actually crossed the Atlantic in the early 1980s, a clearer picture begins to emerge. This was not a single genre arriving all at once. It was a moment where British synthpop led the sound, new wave framed the movement, a new romantic style shaped how it was seen, especially through MTV. That distinction matters because it explains not only who succeeded in America, but why this period changed American music so deeply. This video does not attempt to cover every British or American artist linked to this period. That would go far beyond the scope of a single video. Instead, I have focused on those I feel were most significant in shaping how this invasion took place. At the end of the 1970s, Britain and the United States were standing in very different places musically. In the UK, punk had already dismantled many of the old rules. What followed was not a return to traditional rock, but a move towards experimentation, technology, and modernity. Affordable synthesizers, drum machines, and evolving studio techniques allowed artists to move beyond guitar-led band structures. Music became more electronic, more controlled, and increasingly shaped by the studio. In the United States, mainstream radio was still largely rooted in familiar formats. Album-oriented rock, soft rock, and established production styles dominated the airwaves. Electronic instruments were present, but rarely central. For many American listeners, synthesizers still felt experimental or secondary rather than essential. This gap created an opportunity. Before British synthpop fully took hold in the US, new wave had already begun preparing American audiences for change. A crucial bridge here was Blondie. Although based in New York, Blondie were closely connected to the UK punk and new wave scene, and their success in the late 1970s helped establish new wave as something commercially viable in America. Songs like Heart of Glass, with its electronic pulse and club-influenced rhythm, challenged rock traditions and introduced a more stylized modern sound into the American mainstream. Blondie were not synthpop, but they played an important role in making electronic elements feel acceptable and familiar. By the time British synthpop arrived in force, the ground had already begun to shift. The real acceleration came with television. MTV launched in August 1981 and transformed music into a visual medium played around the clock. Songs were no longer introduced mainly through radio or the music press. They entered American homes through repeated images, fashion, movement, and personality. British artists were particularly well prepared for this shift. In the UK, visual presentation had already become part of how music was communicated. Promotional films, stylized performances, and carefully constructed identities were not extras. They were part of the creative process. When MTV needed content, British labels could supply complete visual packages. The first video played on MTV was Video Killed the Radio Star by the Buggles, a symbolic moment that captured the changing relationship between sound and image. By 1982, British synthpop was no longer a niche interest in the United States. The Human League were among the first to break through decisively. Don't You Want Me reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 with a sound built around synthesizers, programmed rhythms, and a cool, detached vocal delivery. It did not disguise its electronic nature, and its success proved that American audiences were ready. Soft Cell followed with Tainted Love, a song defined by minimal electronic arrangement rather than traditional band performance. Its stark simplicity felt radically different from what dominated US radio at the time. Once again, the synthesizer was not decoration. It was the foundation. Duran Duran's American breakthrough became inseparable from MTV. Musically, their work combined synthesizers with electronic rhythm and pop structure. Visually, their videos projected movement, glamour, and internationalism. This was new romantic style translated for a mass audience, and it resonated strongly. Eurythmics added a colder, more confrontational edge. Sweet Dreams Are Made of This introduced American listeners to a mechanical, hypnotic synth sound, paired with a striking visual identity that challenged conventional ideas of gender and performance. This was not simply entertainment. It was a statement about modernity and control. Culture Club demonstrated how broad the second British invasion could be. Their music blended synthpop with soul and reggae influences, but remained electronically anchored. Through MTV, Boy George became a cultural figure in the US, with image and identity becoming part of the wider conversation. What united these artists was not a single genre label, but a shared approach. Synthesizers were treated as the main instruments. Drum machines replaced traditional rhythm sections. The studio became a creative tool rather than a place to document live performance. As these British acts gained momentum, their influence extended beyond chart success. American artists began to adapt, not by copying directly, but by expanding what they felt allowed to do. The Cars blended guitars with synthesizers in a way that aligned closely with British new wave sensibilities, showing that American bands could thrive within this modern framework. Talking Heads, already active before the invasion, evolved rapidly during this period. Their increasing focus on rhythm, repetition, and studio experimentation reflected a broader shift in how music was constructed, while MTV amplified their visual identity. Devo, conceptually distinct but visually striking, benefited greatly from the new music television landscape. Their work reinforced the idea that image, technology, and irony could coexist with mainstream visibility. As the decade progressed, explicitly electronic American acts began to emerge with greater confidence. Groups such as Berlin, Book of Love, and Information Society operated in a musical environment where British synthpop had already normalized electronic sound as part of the mainstream. At the same time, British artists like Depeche Mode gradually built a strong American following. Initially perceived as colder and more minimal, their sound found a receptive audience as US listeners became more comfortable with darker, more austere electronic music. The cultural impact of the second British invasion extended beyond music. Fashion travelled with the videos. Haircuts, clothing, and graphic design became part of youth identity. British acts projected a sense of modernity aligned with emerging technology and media. This was forward-looking rather than nostalgic. Unlike the British invasion of the 1960s, which brought guitars and bands, the second British invasion brought methods. Synthesizers, programming, studio authorship, and video distribution reshaped how popular music was created and consumed. By the mid-1980s, electronic music no longer felt unusual on American charts. Synthpop had become part of the mainstream vocabulary. New wave had expanded the definition of popular music, and American artists were fully engaged in this new landscape. When I look back at this period, I do not see a temporary trend or a simple takeover. I see a turning point. The second British invasion was the moment when British synthpop, framed as new wave and amplified by new romantic style, permanently altered how American music sounded, looked, and functioned. And once those rules changed, popular music on both sides of the Atlantic was never quite the same again.